Hello, stranger. Welcome back, or welcome home. I hope you're doing well. Observe this sobbing man, for he's the subject of today's video. Before we go forward, I'm going to really recommend you play this yourself. This game is funny, strange, and perfectly absurd. It's a little under an hour, so if you have a day off, a computer, and a cozy blanket, nothing should stand in your way. That said, as you can probably tell, I really like talking about RPG Maker games. They're perfect little pockets of creativity, storytelling, and art, all wrapped up into a neat little 1 to 2 hour experience. They're not without their flaws, however. Like any games, a lot of them are repetitive. I'm the type of person who does believe that there are bad and good games alike. I feel that there are objectively some bad RPG Maker games. In fact, some RPG Maker games are so bad, there's an entire genre made from how poorly designed they can be, although I won't single out any one of them here. Sometimes they can be boring too, which is arguably a worse offense. It's a limited engine, so the most interesting ones are really up to how creative the developer wants to get. Even so, the most unique RPG Maker games can end up as unbalanced experiences with frustrating battle design, confusing maps, and a plot copy-pasted from Undertale or One Shot. I talked a little bit about what makes a game bad in my video about Off, and I think this one is the perfect place to expand on that topic. Why is this game, and others like it, important for the gaming community? All of these questions, and maybe some other ones, in this video about I'm Scared. Oh, no, wait. No, this isn't the one about I'm Scared. This is the one about Space Funeral is a 2003 RPG Maker horror game created by THECATAMITES, Stephen Gilmurphy. It's about a sad little man in pajamas named Philip. Constantly in tears, he sets off from his parents' home, and accompanied by a headless yellow creature, the two of them explore the land of Space Funeral. Philip is a silent protagonist. All that we know of him lies in histrionics. That is to say, there is never a time when Philip isn't sad. We start at home in Scum Village, where our mother says, "Eat your greens," and our father says, "Your mother and I think you should leave." Next to our father appears to be our body in a coffin, lying still with closed eyes. Okay, so maybe Philip isn't always sad. Sometimes he's dead. We exit the tiny room and are met with an assault on our eyes. I mean, the first town in Space Funeral. The land is dotted with bloody skulls, mannequin heads, and tiny pink trees along the blue grass. Pink paths snake between buildings, which are actually just large heads, which leak blood with mouths agape. The citizens of this Scum Village are eccentric, bloody creatures who offer helpful tips for the game, except for this guy. The Wizard of Scum Village tells us of a perfect city, a divine construct from which derives all things in this world. All things are manifestations of this one thing. All cities are aspects of the city. He tells us that there is another wizard far ahead in the Blood Cavern, but that because of the city's corruption, it is too late for us. That seems to be something we're told pretty often, but we press on anyway. If we head right, we're offered a chance to go to the Bone Swamp from Lucy Van Pelt, the girl from Charlie Brown who keeps taking the football from the bald child. Anyway, we can go through the Bone Swamp on a little boat, opening a few chests and eventually entering a dark cave where we're met with our first enemies. Space Funeral's enemies range from silly and campy to downright unsettling. We're met here with a gory, disembodied head on crab legs and a severed arm reaching up from the earth to claw at us. When they're gone, we talk to some knights gathered further down the cave who warn us of a dragon. One knight in particular bleeds to death on the ground. If we give him a big blood, he thanks us and gives us a scroll that will help if we fight the dragon ourselves. The dragon in question, Swamp Trog, seems to be fairly moral as far as bosses go, but we kill him anyway because RPG Maker game. He gives us some healing items and a level up, and unblocks the way to another room with even more fun collectibles. Back we go on the path from Scum Village. Making our way through several enemies, we can speak to a headless NPC with a fountain of blood spurting from his neck who tells us that the ram heads are artifacts of an earlier, less barbaric time. This could be a reference to the physical ram's head that in real life represented a tribute or offering to a deity during the time of Egyptian pharaohs. I thought it was a neat parallel, but I'm not sure if the two are related. At any rate, we get to see one of my favorite parts of the game, a little room with a floating letter. When we approach the letter, we get to read it, and it says,
Disappointed!
Typically the letters have underwhelming messages like this one. This is our introduction to Space Funeral's odd charm and wit. As you'll soon see, this game is unabashedly silly and fun to play, and it really keeps the player in mind. It feels like an invisible narrator is telling you the jokes, which I love. We move on to the next map and stumble upon a fella Leghorse is a yellow, four-legged horse monster whose neck ends in a bloody stump where a head should be. We find him trying to fend off some blood wolves, and then he yells at us to join him or choose death, which is definitely our only option. When we fight the blood wolves, Leghorse agrees to join us, by which I mean he tells us to obey him, and we do so despite his demands. Probably because it's easier to have a headless horse in our party than just be a little sad man in pajamas. Leghorse tells us that he's looking for a certain wizard, perhaps the same one who will help cure the land of its impurities, so we head north with our new friend and sail through the Blood River. Leghorse notices an error floating beside them, a Datamosh sprite passing through the Blood River. He says no one knows what they were originally, something which broke or which could not be translated during the Great Change. This Great Change that Leghorse is speaking of, we'll go back over later, but keep it in mind for right now. We get to talk to some cute NPCs on the boat and then head over to Blood Swamp. The Blood Swamp is the darkest area of the game, and I mean that in every way. The peaceful music transitions into Ruth White's narration of Spleen by Charles Baudelaire, and the sky becomes overcast with crimson shades as William shambles through the haunting new world. Leghorse breaks the horrible feeling of dread that permeates the air as we approach him and the wizard Grum. Leghorse pushes us aside to speak to the wizard, and although we never get to hear the conversation, he seems unhappy about the news.
Well, when life gives you lemons.
The wizard Grum tells us we can speak to him for the price of our blood. There's no way to get around this, but he will ask to take more if we're stupid enough to say yes a second time, and then a third. Grum gives us some general advice and says it's too late for you, which is hilarious. We're directed to the city of Forms in the north through the wastelands where you may stumble upon an old friend of his. Leaving the blood swamp, we approach a blood ghoul who speaks of spurting blood in gobs and gobs. He also recites some lyrics to us before we turn him to dust. After defeating the blood ghoul, we're too scared to go back into the cave and so press on to Malice, a sun-scorched town with ruins at its heart. Malice is a bright and busy city that's home to thugs, pigs, and the girl from Charlie Brown again. She's a merchant in town this time instead of standing by a boat, and we can buy some items from her shop. A blood bag for health points, or magic nuts for magic points. There are plenty of chests to be found in each shopping area, and you'll find that it's actually very difficult to die in the game at all. That is, unless Philip has a mental breakdown, but I digress. We press on to the town where residents speak of a crazed man called the 20th Century Boy who roams the area in search of blood. We also hear of Mombis and Lion Village, both things we should expect to encounter if we were to make it to the City of Forms, as mentioned by the insane Wizard Grum. We are banned from leaving by two huge thugs, and so are forced to explore the town. Malice has a lot to see, including a farm where you can purchase sentient steaks for 50 rubles, a handful of strange notes, a carbon copy of ourselves who stares blankly into space, a shop where we can buy some useless shit, and the house of Wizard Grum, Yorm, who offers to return our form to normal should we lose it. We also get the opinions of varying characters on Malice and its massive increase in crime. Pig A and Pig B are the merchants of Malice who sell us health items and equipment, respectively. The shopkeepers leave us with some words of encouragement, and so we move on. We find one particularly angry thug hiding out in one of the houses, who reveals to us the location of a secret hideout a little ways outside of Malice. Indeed, criminals approach us quickly as we explore the outskirts of town, and we have no repel spray, so fight them we must. Hidden in another cave is the headless resident from before who stands near an unearthed heir, something that's become more common in Space Funeral. Again, it's something to keep in mind. If we use the previous thug's tip and enter through the back, we can make our way sneakily to Rip the Blood, the boss of all thugs. He sets the stage by telling us he is impressed at our persistence and begins to tell us the story of the many men he has killed, citing the lines of Lloyd Price's Stagger Lee as his speech. Funnily enough, the king of crime is taken down quite easily when we throw some tracts and Bible verses at him, and when he falls, we're allowed access to the djinn behind him. After rubbing the lamp a few times, the genie emerges and reads our thoughts in order to make the right wish. We're told that Leghorse is stuck as whatever this is until we reach the City of Forms. For us, however, we're given a choice between money, power, and happiness. The first and second wishes are easily granted, but the latter will give us Crossing the Rivers of You, Actualizing Your Self-Potential in 30 Days or Less by Paul Scud, PhD. Yes. Really. Then we get turned into a fish. Back in town, we can return to normal via the Wizard Grum's abilities and are back on the quest in no time. Looking as pathetic as any Radiohead album sounds, we visit the ghost of our past self and use its life force to heal while the spirit of our mother watches, as one does. On to the Mystery Forest, which is a whimsical purple area littered with sagging trees and dotted with mushrooms and other fauna. The land is cut through with winding orange rivers and pink cobblestone. Vengeful ghosts pollute the land alongside little elves. If you happen to catch one or two of these creatures, you're given access to Elf Grotto, where you find an elf who gives you some cool objects for not stepping on him. Between Elf Grotto and a sea of slightly tougher enemies, Lion Village welcomes you. The lions seem to be peaceful creatures who offer various pieces of wisdom, items, and other gifts. In fact, if you bought a steak earlier, you can sell it to one of the lions named Susan, who will take it off your hands for 325 rubles. Bubsy is the matriarch of the town, who says that the village, conveniently shaped like a lion in and of itself, gathers together lions from all over the world who are drawn in by meat. Bubsy also warns us of the 20th Century Boy, the wild man who we heard of earlier in the ruins. Gathering our bearings and and leaving Lion Village behind, we are finally treated to a moment with 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝘾𝙀 further down the road. He remarks upon a lone building in the clearing, stoically recalling that in his past life, he was not a headless yellow monster. 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝘾 used to be Prince Horus, who ruled the earth with his brother Dag before the earth suddenly changed. Before he can finish his tale, a member of the Beatles, I mean the wild man of the earth, appears from nowhere. We're thrown into a battle with little warning and forced to face off against 20th century boy, whose difficulty level is slightly higher. Unfortunately, however, his defeat is an easy one, which leads to 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝑾's discovery that he's just murdered his own brother Dag. Having been disfigured by the Great Change, the two failed to recognize one another until it was too late. Dag requests that we avenge his death before collapsing into a bloody heap in the mulberry grass. We shamble on to the next area, the final one before the City of Forms. The Northern Waste is a mountainous, snowy map with fast-moving enemies who take a bit more finessing to avoid. The ram head's bloody flesh is frozen over, their still open eyes staring listlessly into space. Taking advantage of Philip's lunge and 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝑾's power kick will quickly dispatch the snow frogs in this area. The Northern Wastes are home to Dracula. No, I will not elaborate. If I chose to give details, I think it would ruin the experience. Instead, I'm going to place this here with absolutely no context. Moving on from this frozen wasteland, we can take a boat to the City of Forms, from which there's no return. It's a bright and colorful mismatch of textures, broken sprites, and misplaced characters. Our mother sits in a flat pool of water, inviting us for a swim, and two zombies with briefcases offer up some conflicting advice. We're led through a hall of still sprites, now standing idle and reduced to nothing but textures. Nothing happens when we approach them. The mom remains in its characteristic grimace, and the quiet black dog sits patiently with red, unblinking eyes. With nowhere else to go, we enter the door straight ahead, where the creator of the world awaits us. Moon is a constantly shifting creature with three forms that join to create a being. He welcomes us to the City of Forms, now formless, and explains his intentions. Faced with the sterile perfection of the past world, Moon chose to invoke the Great Change, changing every creature into a monstrous state from its original beautiful shape. From suffering only comes beauty, and from ugliness perfection can be attained, or at least some version of it. With his still flickering faces, he muses on the possibilities of many worlds like this one, many changes like the Great Change. 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝘾, offended at the idea, engages in battle. Taking the form of a giant red and blue dragon encasing jagged fangs between its scales, Moon is naturally quite tougher than most of the other enemies, with stronger attacks and no weaknesses. As with the rest, however, Moon falls, wishing us happiness in our perfect world. Philip and 𝙁𝙎𝘼𝘾 escape the collapsing building and come out on the other side as default RPG Maker sprites. Credits sit quietly at the bottom of a black screen as the two characters jump excitedly and leave the screen, allowing us to indulge in the last image of a ram's head, its blood leaking into the bright green grass. The first time I played this game, I had forgotten all about the ending. It was underwhelming and I was confused, honestly. I had seen this sort of thing before, but this was different. I'm talking about Off, of course. Space Funeral and Off are both the type of game to stab you 47 times in an alleyway after attending your birthday party, only Off pretends to be your friend first. What I'm trying to say is that I could see how either game would be difficult for the average player to digest. We're not here to compare the two by any means, although parallels are constantly drawn to its predecessor. Space Funeral calls for meaning in a different way. The ending of Space Funeral serves as both a commentary on the state of RPG Maker games at the time and a sort of self-serving image of the artist from the perspective of imaginary characters and a fictional world. Space Funeral feels like someone's taken a magnifying glass to a macrocosm, putting into question the nature of creativity and pushing the boundaries of what it means to express oneself. In the game, the characters are mortified at the idea of being broken. They view themselves as hideous caricatures or mockeries of themselves, as Leghorst put it. Lines are rough and jagged, animations are poorly stitched together, and blood covers nearly every character and creature that roams the lands in some way. But people love this game. Especially me. Space Funeral is hailed as one of the most legendary RPG Maker games from the 2000s. According to Steven, the large file size didn't even seem to deter many from waiting hours on dial-up for the game to download properly. It doesn't matter to most that the art style is unpolished or that the dialogue was silly. This was still when Bioshock and Call of Duty were at the height of their fame. Console games were climbing over each other for the top spot, and physical games were still wildly popular in comparison to today's digital realm. While Amnesia and Red Dead Redemption claimed the charts, others were still searching for unique experiences they could enjoy in their home computers, free to play and untouched by large studios who had control over the market. We hadn't experienced Lisa the Painful quite yet. I don't know. ib hadn't even been thought about when Space Funeral graced the listings for games made with RPG Maker 2003. Steven remarks that he hadn't had a chance to finish Off yet due to the exhaustive grinding in the game. I understand. In a world where RPG Maker games were little assortments of stories that drew similarities to Final Fantasy and Earthbound, Space Funeral stood out as the most creative subversion of expectations in the genre at the time. But the characters in Space Funeral individuality is a sin. Now we live in a world where indie games are the lifeblood of modern art. Many AAA studios survive off of tropes hidden behind stunning graphics and high price tags, but the soul of a game is in its artistic license. I talked about this a little bit in my Off video as well, which I'm now going to put on your watch list by force. In any industry, there will always be hobbyists who slip under the radar, secretly supplying an audience with inspiration for generations to come. It's sort of like how gourmet restaurants exist, but there are still chefs who cook for passion and below the craft. Without hobbyists, the craft is worthless, and if anyone should know, I think Steven's a great example. Gil Murphy has a history of game development that's colorful and interesting, to say the least. His games are varied, each using different art styles and a host of unique mechanics. His compendium includes Anthology of the Killer, Magic Wand, and Goblet Grotto, the latter of which took a feature in Magic Mush's YouTube video about strange indie games, and got a feature in a blog or two. To see a game developer with such a varied portfolio is not unusual. Many of your favorite developers, myself included, because you love me, have a hand in many different forms of self-expression. Indie games have gone from a simple way to avoid the technological limits of the time to an entirely new way to express oneself. This is not to say that all indie games are unique and cool and special. I don't want to make it seem like all indie game developers are untouchable gods who are immune to making bad work. Oh no, there are plenty of indie horror games that copy and paste. When PT released, every young developer sprang to their computers with the hope that they would become the next Kojima. No, really, there are like hundreds of PT clones. Some YouTubers have made a killing just from streaming these unoriginal games. Granted, Kojima's playable teaser was one of the most impactful pieces of media in gaming history. PT changed what we consider horror, not just due to its incredible atmosphere, but because of its creative use of a repetitive structure, which has inspired some of the most popular games to this day. PT is not the only one to inspire a host of uncreative games. I know you have seen at least one of the many variations of the Backrooms. Everyone is clamoring to make the quirkiest thing they can as quickly as possible. Even I am not immune to the propaganda. Some of these inspirations end up making beautiful and unique games that in turn inspire other generations. Others, not so much. At any rate, indie games are spaces where one can exercise freedom in making whatever they want. There's no pressure to make something particularly good or bad. In fact, bad games can often be some of the most fun to play, a fact highlighted by popular streamers. Itch.io and Steam are the perfect places to comb through projects made by a homegrown team of random people and learn from their work. You can definitely still have fun with bad indie games, something that might not fly with a $60 game fresh off Nintendo's website. I say all of this to say that Space Funeral is a game that makes a statement about the industry as a whole. You are meant to be dismayed with the ending that Steven calls bittersweet. It's a subversion of expectations that, while a fun play on a fictional world, would spell consequences for the real world today. Without deviation from the norm, without change, there is no art. I would say that everything is a copy of a copy. And, well, It is. But variation is what often breeds success, even according to our DNA. Let me put my biology degree to use for 1 second because it is relatable and goddammit, I'm in debt. You've heard of natural selection, I'm certain. It's that thing where certain organisms that aren't fit for the environment are culled, and one by one, organisms in their surviving gene pool reproduce, as their unique traits are the ones that allow them to live longer.
Now we can destroy this old lady. What? Every time you say what, we'll destroy an old lady. What? Every time you say no, we'll destroy an old lady. No! What? Please, don't destroy any more old women. Every time you look sad, we'll destroy a big old woman. Ever since I got this.
It's how we get completely white creatures with oily skin in the coldest parts of the world, and a little dry guys in the gulch. The model of natural selection states that organisms should possess heritable differences, and that some organisms should reproduce more than others in order to perpetuate a cycle of growth. So, the two qualities that define natural selection are to pass your differences on to the next generation, and have a lot of children so the survivability of those differences can increase. Basically, that means we would need multiple organisms with multiple different traits to eventually produce an ideal organism who would be the fittest for a particular environment. It takes multiple tries to create something that works, so to speak. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the game market is the same way. Multiple different artists who make the exact same kind of games and the exact same way, hypothetically, have less of a chance to put something unique into the world of art. But then, if one individual decides to change things up, we suddenly have a cool new good thing. If cool new good thing persists, then more copies of that will be made, and so on and so forth. Elements of cool new good thing will persist in future copies of tiny homebrewed games made in a dark room that smells like Fritos near you. In order to make art, we need to create heritable differences, so to speak. So far, we've seen unpolished, scraggly, hand-drawn sprites, the integration of rhythm gaming, the use of virtual UI, claymation, the manipulation of the world around the player, and roguelikes that soak up hours of the player's time. All of these games take from one another in different ways, yet still remain original. Space Funeral was one of the first to do just that, at least in the realm of RPG Maker games, and to gain notoriety from it. Space Funeral's existence as what is essentially a well-written horror comedy with an unpolished art style was impactful during its time, and is still incredibly important today. So, what is the difference between a bad game and a bad game? I've done a lot of talking about good and bad games now, but I'm not sure I'm in a place to do so. I mean, yes, I make games and a bunch of other stuff.
And then there's Chunky. He's dead.
But by no means has my audience backed the amount of talk I've been doing. I would say I've had a lot of experience as an artist, but not as a popular artist in the industry, and there is a difference. A lot of people talk about the quality of games as something static, objective, and that includes me. If art is supposed to be fun and subjective, how could I have the audacity to call a game good or bad? Does a bad game mean default textures, default assets, or poorly executed music? Is the gameplay boring or too disorganized? Is the story too confusing for the player? Does bad animation make a bad game? What about bad run cycles, bugs, or distorted textures? Is a bad game a copy of another, or does it use AI? I think what I mean when I talk about games that suck in particular is somewhere on the technical scale. For instance, it might be physically unplayable, or it might be so poorly optimized that it makes your brand new computer crash on stream. But I have to backtrack because all of these elements are often used in some of the most popular games to date. Cruelty Squad is probably the best example I can think of right now. Every room is merely a collection of ugly textures slapped on top of each other haphazardly. The voice blips are murky and disturbing. The character design is polygonal even for PS1 standards. The game is unwelcoming, rough, and its assemblage of mechanics are confusing for new players. Don't forget Splatter, another game stuffed with confusing verbiage and alien concepts. Like Cruelty Squad, Splatter echoes whispers of gender confusion and identity swapping while being sort of a mess to look at. It moves quickly and your eyes are constantly struggling to keep up with the many visual effects. I love both of these games. I love them like I love Blade. To me, these aren't bad at all. The two have somehow managed to combine so many elements of what we consider hideous and foul that they have effectively transformed each part into a brand new way to see video games. That's not bad at all. That's groovy. Why should games that fail to achieve the same standard as a work of art be considered bad? Are games without the highest graphics loved because they're charming? Do we look at low quality games like a little kid who wants to be a star when they grow up? What are the fucking rules? Where do we draw the line between bad Unity project and bad game that's so bad it's good? Why do we get to draw the line at all? And should people who aren't game developers have a say-so in what games are good or bad? We hardly judge films or animation with the same candor, perhaps because games are a direct experience with the player instead of something to merely be digested. After all, animation memes were criticized by its age-equivalent audience just a few years ago, and yet the value of animation memes lies in the artist's freedom to practice animation without investing days upon days of work. If you don't know, animation memes are repetitive animations, typically featuring a detailed character that mimics emotion or a popular song. The animation meme allows the artist to animate freely with the music they enjoy and to focus on improving the quality of a specific scene without being forced to commit to an entire project that can hang them up for weeks on end. I would know, because I used to make animation memes. I looked down on them in the past, but now I see their value. Back to the point I was making. I think it all comes down to one thing: laziness. It's not the mere fact that a developer might reuse a default asset or keep in that god-awful Unity walk cycle sound. It's not that you can't animate or draw. It's not that you can't make music or how your music sounds even. It's the level of effort you put in. It's taken time, but I've learned the distinction between well-meaning art with high effort and lazy clone of Layers of Fear for a cash grab number 500. I have friends who make music and aren't limited by their experience with professional production, and friends who want to make a film with their iPhone. I've got an entire Discord of talented people who want to animate, despite the fact that their computer might be on its last leg. The world of art is fueled by freaks and weirdos, but it's also fueled by courage. The ability to put your stuff out there and promote it when you know nobody else cares is even greater than having a proclivity for one thing or another. 𝙎𝙋𝘼𝘾𝙀, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the creator of Giraffe Town, makes work that is uncanny and sometimes disturbing. His 3D work is surreal, and he prefers to use text-to-speech over voice acting for some reason. He is the creator of Potato Thriller and The Debug, which features a praying mantis with glazed over eyes and pockmarked skin. But if you go to his website, you can tell he loves making games. That's what makes a good game, in my opinion. By the way, I love Potato Thriller. Another clarification then, before we move on. I don't want to make it seem as though games can only be created out of some selfless desire to put good into the world. You can make games for any reason, be it money, fame, or the passion of simply doing it. Your game doesn't have to mean anything to be important either. The meaning that people find in the silliest work is kind of incredible. It's always better to let others make what they will out of your work, to let your work be an individual experience for each person who sees it. I've often found that games made with passion are the finest art. The market is constantly changing. The next new Sans is already in the making at somebody's house shortly. There's no viable way to guess who will be making the most money at what time, and although you can follow an algorithm, like people have done with analog horror or other trends on YouTube, for instance, an emptiness in your work may follow closely behind its inception. Space Funeral looks bad, sure. It's not an impressive looking game with stunning 4K graphics or beautiful sprite work even. It is what it is. Perhaps I have crafted more meaning from Space Funeral than it deserves, but I like it. I think a bad game would be to use default sprites, to create a game that looks as uncreative as it plays. I think to make a bad game, you should accept that you will never put anything new or wonderful into the world, however ugly. Follow someone else's style. Do what someone else popular has done. Don't make any new characters or spin a new story. It's too risky and people might not like it. There's only one thing worse than making an unoriginal game, and that's to make nothing at all. I think that is truly everything I've got to say about this work of art. Space Funeral is a testament to its genre and to its time. When I asked Steven why the game is so short, he said he felt that it was definitely a game that should be short and sweet, and I agree. If Space Funeral had overstayed its welcome, it would have lost its charm. There are very few examples of games whose charm outweighs the length of the game and the workload the player has in front of them. Hell, we all needed to take a break and get a snack when we were playing Undertale. I think that the character design worked really well in favor of Space Funeral. Steven describes Leghorse's dialogue as following the pattern of how he thinks a horse would talk, but I'm not sure if I could have handled 36 in-game hours of that guy plus DLC. The music, the characters, the funny little moments in dialogue, it all works together. Game development is a lot of different things that combine at once to make the perfect experience. Fueled by passion and a lot of coffee, your average solo developer is sweating blood at their keyboard in an attempt to unwind the complicated story in their soul. Some of my favorite games were made with blood, sweat, and tears, even the ones that people often look over. Not every game has to be a massive success to be a work of art. It doesn't have to be good to be a work of art either. I thought I should clarify that. Go play Space Funeral. It's free on Game Jolt. And be sure to take a day to relax. Drink some water. Take care of yourself. Go outside and touch the grasses. I love you, and I will see you until next time, stranger. Good night.